So, listen to this. England turned Bukayo Saka into a hero, but only after he became its biggest heartbreak. A 19-year-old kid walked up to take a penalty that would define a nation's summer. And in a few seconds, it defined him instead. They say he moved on, that he came back stronger, that he became the symbol of resilience this country needed. But what if that's not the full story? What if that moment didn't make Saka stronger, but followed him everywhere he went? Because sometimes in football, you don't escape the moment. You just learn how to live inside it. At first, this looks like a simple story. A young player misses a penalty on the biggest stage, faces the weight of a nation, and somehow finds a way to come back stronger. It's the kind of narrative football loves to tell. The kind that turns pain into purpose and failure into identity. And for Bukayo Saka, that's exactly how the world goes. A symbol of resilience, a reminder that even the darkest moments can be moving. This isn't really a story about redemption. It's about what happens after the story ends. Because while everyone moved on, while the headlines changed and the applause returned, that moment never really disappeared. It stayed quietly shaping expectations, redefining pressure, and turning every future moment into something heavier than it should be. And that's where the real story begins. Not in the failure itself, but in everything that came after it. Before that night, before the pressure, before the weight of an entire country found its way onto his shoulders, Bukayo Saka was something much simpler. He was just a kid playing football the way it was meant to be played, growing up in London, coming through Arsenal's academy, and there was always something different about him, but not in the way people usually expect. It wasn't just talent, it was the way he played, almost like nothing around him could touch him. No fear, no hesitation, just instinct. And that's rare, especially in modern football, where every touch is analysed and every mistake is magnified. But Saka didn't seem to care about any of that, at least not yet.
Lovely ball through.
At Arsenal, he didn't arrive as a headline signing or a generational prodigy. He grew into the team quietly and naturally, adapting wherever he was needed, left back, winger, creator, finisher. It didn't really matter. What stood out wasn't just what he could do, but how he did it. There was a sense of freedom in his game, like he wasn't carrying anything with him onto the pitch, and that made people connect with him. Fans didn't just admire Saka, they trusted him because he felt real, like someone who hadn't yet been shaped by pressure or expectation. And for a while,
Saka rolls it right across the face.
He wasn't the centre of every conversation. He wasn't expected to carry anything beyond his own performance. He was just part of a young Arsenal team, finding his place and growing at his own pace. But then everything started to change, because football has a way of taking something pure and turning it into something much heavier. And for Saka, that shift didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once. It didn't happen over a season or even a series of bad performances. It happened in a single tournament, in a single run, where everything seemed to be building towards something bigger than anyone expected. England, a team so often defined by disappointment, suddenly found itself one step away from
C'est pas sifflé, Trossard, Saka, faut la sortir, et Bukayo Saka.
Player to being part of something much larger than himself. At first, it felt like a breakthrough. He wasn't supposed to be the main character, not in a squad filled with bigger names and more experienced players. But game by game, moment by moment, he became impossible to ignore. His energy, his directness, the way he carried the ball without fear, it added something England didn't have before. And people noticed, not just fans, but the entire narrative around the team started to shift. Saka wasn't just included in the team, he was trusted. But trust in football is never neutral. It always comes with expectation. And expectation, especially at that level, doesn't stay quiet for long. By the time England reached the final at Wembley, the atmosphere had already changed. This wasn't just a match, it was years of frustration, decades of near misses, all compressed into one night. The stadium wasn't just full, it was heavy. Every pass, every decision, every touch carried more than it should. And for most players, that pressure builds slowly over a career. But for Saka, it arrived all at once. The game itself only made things worse. England took the lead early, the kind of start that should calm nerves. But instead, it did the opposite, because as the match dragged on, as Italy found their way back into it, the tension didn't just grow, it tightened. You could feel it in every misplaced pass and every hesitant movement. And when the game finally went to penalties, it stopped being about football entirely. It became something else, something psychological, something unforgiving. And then came the decision, Gareth Southgate choosing his penalty takers, experienced players stepping up, and then at the very end, Bukayo Saka, 19 years old, no real experience in moments like this, and yet there he was, walking toward the spot with everything around him falling silent. That walk is the part people remember differently. Some see courage, others see inevitability. But what matters is what it represented, because in that moment, Saka wasn't just taking a penalty, he was carrying the weight of a nation that had been waiting decades for something to finally go their way. And when he struck the ball and it didn't go in, everything changed. Not gradually, not over time, instantly. In a few seconds, the story flipped, England lost, the dream ended, and Saka, the young player who had played with so much freedom, became the face of something much darker, because football doesn't just remember moments like that, it attaches them to people, and from that point on, whether it was fair or not, that moment belonged to him. What followed should have been simple: a missed penalty, a lost final, a young player learning from a painful moment. Football has seen it before and it always moves on, but this time it didn't feel like football anymore. It felt heavier, uglier, more personal, because almost immediately the reaction went far beyond the pitch. Social media filled with anger, with blame, with abuse that had nothing to do with the game itself, and suddenly, Saka wasn't just a player who missed, he became a target. But then something unusual happened. Instead of letting that narrative grow, something shifted. Teammates spoke out, managers, pundits, even rival fans stepped in. Murals appeared, messages of support spread everywhere. The same country that had just watched him miss now rallied around him. And for a moment, it looked like football had done something rare. It chose empathy over blame. At least that's what it looked like on the surface. Because while the support was real, it also started to change what Saka represented. He wasn't just Bukayo Saka anymore, the young Arsenal player who played with freedom and joy. He became something symbolic. A story. A message. The player who stood for resilience, for strength, for everything football wanted to believe about itself. And that shift matters more than it seems. Because when a player becomes a symbol, the expectations around them change completely. You could see it in the way he returned to club football. The numbers were still there. Performances were strong, consistent, sometimes even better than before. He scored, he assisted, he carried Arsenal through difficult moments. On paper, it looked like the perfect response. The kind of comeback that confirms everything people want to believe about mentality and character, but the context around those performances had changed. Every good moment wasn't just appreciated, it was interpreted. Every goal became proof that he had overcome it. Every strong performance became part of a narrative that he was now stronger because of that night. And that's where things get complicated, because football loves simple stories. It needs them. Failure followed by redemption, pain followed by growth. It's easy to understand and easy to celebrate, but real life, especially at that level, doesn't work like that. Moments like that don't just disappear because you play well the next week. They stay quietly in the background, shaping how people see you and how you see yourself. Even in interviews, even in the way Saka spoke about that night, there was always a careful balance. He acknowledged it, but never let it define him publicly. He spoke about support, about learning, about moving forward. And again, that fits the narrative. That's exactly what people want to hear, but the absence of something doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means it isn't visible. And then there were the bigger moments, the games that carried weight, the situations that felt similar, even if they weren't identical. Every time Saka stepped into a high-pressure situation, there was an unspoken question hanging in the background, not loud enough to be discussed openly, but present enough to be felt. What happens if it goes wrong again? Because that's the part people don't talk about, not directly. They celebrate the comeback, they highlight the resilience, but they rarely acknowledge the cost of becoming that kind of story. Because once you are defined by a moment like that, even in a positive way, you don't get to go back to being just a player. You carry that moment with you, not as a memory, but as part of your identity.